If you thought the last talk was nerdy, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're about to get super nerdy. We're going to dive deep into fonts. We're going to hear from Roel, who is a front-end developer, describes himself as a font hacker. Those are two words you don't hear put together very often. A computer nerd from hell. He's like me. We've been around the block. We've been doing web stuff for a while. You can tell, and he still enjoys tinkering with HTML,
Yep.
CSS, and he writes about it. You've probably seen his website, Pixelombect. This is going to be fun, honest. Please give a big welcome to Roel Nieskens.
Hey CSS Day! Hello. Welcome to Problems Solved by OpenType. Or more specifically, Problems Solved by OpenType layout features. And we're not actually really solving problems. Stuff still works when this doesn't work. So we're kind of improving details. And since this is mostly about aesthetics and design and personal preferences, some of this stuff is subjective. And since we are at CSS Day, we're using CSS. So I suppose welcome to details subjectively improved by OpenType layout features and CSS. My name is Roel Nieskens, or in English, Roel Nieskens. I actually paid an artist to draw up this horrible pun. Money well spent, I think. I do stuff online as under the name Pixelombect. I create font-related things for Google Fonts, typographic, Font Awesome, the Type Founders, and I really enjoy that because I love fonts. And I'm a crappy designer, but I'm a pretty adequate developer. So I really like the technical side of fonts. And I want to show you some of these things that fonts can do that you can use Monday morning when you go back to the office. You can just start using them, and they will make those details a little bit better. So, but before we get into that, let's establish a baseline, no pun intended. What are fonts anyway? And if we go through this, then we're all on the same page, and we can start looking at some really cool stuff that they can do. So what are fonts? Fonts are like binary files. They are completely useless if you open them in a text editor or if you dump them on the screen. It's just hexadecimal garbage. But we all know inside those fonts live pictures of letters, like tiny boxes of letters. And if you take one font, it will produce pictures of letters, and we take another font, it will produce different letters. By the way, if you want to know which font is on the screen, I would put the credits there. So this is Pomfret by DJR. So this is another bunch of pictures of letters that a font can produce. And of course, the classic. So, and these pictures inside those fonts, we know these are vector images, right? We can scale them indefinitely, and they will always look good. There's no pixelation happening. These are, well, scalable vector images. Well, not SVGs, but a different type. And these things are called glyphs. And they live in an mbox, which is a made-up constraint by the type designer. And that's where all the glyphs are drawn in. And usually, all fonts, all glyphs stay inside their mbox. And eventually, all these glyphs are matched to Unicode characters, or just letters that are in your HTML document. Well, this is an example of a font leaving the mbox. The mbox is right in the middle, but the swashes need to go out of there, otherwise you would get really wide letters. So, okay, binary files that have pictures of letters, that's right, that's like the most basic description of fonts, right? But there's something in there called OpenType layout features. And you might not have heard about those, but I'm pretty sure you heard about this. Kerning, or when done wrong, keying. It's when a type designer has decided that for certain letter combinations, there should be less space between the letters. And that kind of is interesting. So there's not just pictures in there, there's some logic in there, some information in there, and the font can do some intelligent stuff. Here's another one that you probably know. When a type designer, if you put some letters next to each other very closely, they kind of collide. Like here, the swoopy of the F. Swoopy is a professional term that us typographers use. The swoopy of the F collides with that dot of the I, and it kind of looks like a mistake. It looks like a mess, right? So a font can produce a thing called a ligature. And this is like the classic example, the FI ligature, at least for Western languages. So instead of producing the F and the I, the font can say, no, that's going to go wrong. So please use this image of the F and the I that the type designer specifically made for this. And that theoretically looks better. Your mileage may vary on that. Some people really hate them, because if you look at it for a while, you think, what, is that a squared N with a swoopy? Why does that squared N have a swoopy? It's a, So, and when I learned about fonts, or about ligatures, I thought, okay, I'm going to find out how this works. And I usually find out how things work by doing stupid shit. So I did it here as well. I made a font that takes buzzwords and turns them into bullshit. So if I say like the big data is in the cloud for gamification. Right. And you might notice that these buzzwords are kind of dated because I made this like 8 years ago, and there's like doesn't even have Bitcoin or blockchain or anything. It doesn't even have AI. But specifically for today, especially for today, I created one for ChatGPT. Like one ligature, and it's already smarter. So that was kerning and ligatures. That's kind of the basics, but I learned about other stuff that fonts can do, and you've probably seen this as well. These are different letter forms. This is the same font, but I've turned on specific versions of letters, like alternates. So you can use these in your design to make the typeface like match your vibe a little bit more, right? So you can have those really weird characters. Oh wait, here it's a little bit clearer. These are the different ones. Right, you can turn them on and off as you so desire. And to prove that Squiggy really is a meek cat, that's Squiggy. And that gives me an opportunity for a drink. He's not called Squiggy, but Squiggy had more better letter forms here. So, those alternates can also do other things, like if a certain character is repeated and you want the font to look kind of like handwritten or handmade, the font can produce a different version of that letter, so it kind of looks like it's handwritten. And this font, this is the same font as before. It can also have kind of like what Sans Bullshit Sans was doing, but more useful. It can take certain letter combinations and then produce a nice little word there. Here's a recipe. It kind of looks okay, right? You know exactly which measurements you need for this recipe, but you know that those fractions don't really look like that. It's not just 1/4. They should look like this. And this is another feature that font can do. It can recognize, is this a fraction? Then I'll produce actual numbers slash for that fraction. So it won't make grandma's cookies any less gross, but the recipe will look a lot better. So, of course, this is a swashy font, but some fonts should be even more swashier. So you can turn on a feature called swashes, and then you get swashes. So this was all kind of fun and games, but some of these OpenType features are really essential for certain languages because they wouldn't work without them. Like one example, because I'm a yokel from the Netherlands, I only know English and Dutch, so I'm a bit out of my league here, but there are languages that really need those OpenType features. For instance, this is the name Svetlana in Russian, and you can see I put the language tag on the paragraph there, a language attribute saying this is Russian. But if I change that to Bulgarian, some of those letter forms change because the Cyrillic script for Bulgarian has different letter forms. This is the word salam in Arabic, or better, these are the 4 Unicode values that you would use for that. And by themselves, these characters would produce these letter forms. But that's not how the word is actually written. So OpenType recognizes that these letter forms follow each other, and depending on whether they start in the front of the word or in the middle of the word or at the end, these letter forms can change. And if OpenType features wouldn't work here, you would get that middle version, and that would just be wrong. So then we got variable fonts. These are not technically OpenType layout features, but I want to show you quickly because it's a very important part of modern fonts. Previously, if you would put 3 weights on a screen, you would have light, regular, and bold. You load 3 fonts, but now we can load 1 font, and it has all weights from the most extremes and all inside, all between them. The same for widths. You don't have to load 3 different widths anymore. You can just load 1 variable font and it will stretch. So I think you've probably seen this, right? Is anybody using variable fonts in production? Oh, nice. Good, good, good. But there is one thing that I really like about variable fonts. That wasn't really obvious to me in the beginning. We established that these letter forms, these glyphs, they can scale, right? So you can take them, you can scale them up, and they will look nice. There's crisp edges there, no pixelation. That's really cool. But there is something really cool that can be done with variable fonts. Oh. And I'm going to explain that by mushrooms, of course. Say you have a fictitious video game and it has a mushroom. If you want that mushroom to be 10 times this size, you can just scale it up, right? But it doesn't really look that good. Because this is kind of a waste. The canvas has gone much bigger, so you have more opportunity for detail. So why not draw this mushroom, right? And variable fonts can do the same. They can adapt to the size that they're shown at. So they will have a different letter forms for, like, if they're at 12 pixels or 16 pixels. And they will have different letter forms if they're huge. So here's the same font again, but if I increase the size, you see those letter forms, they change a little bit, right? There's much more detail. The spacing can be a little bit tighter because there's now more room, so characters don't bleed into each other. And if you noticed that ampersand there, that switches, like when the type designer decides, okay, at this size, we get more room for swoopies, so it puts a swoopy in there. A similar thing that variable fonts can do is help out with dark mode. And this is a dramatic reenactment. I didn't know how this would look on the big screen, but usually when you put white type on a dark surface, that will look a little bit bolder. And you want to bump down that boldness a little bit, but if you would do that with actual font weight, it would reflow the page probably, because maybe now some lines wouldn't fit anymore, and then they go to a new line. But you want the dark mode version of your site to be the same, so you can adjust the grading a little bit. So you make the font a little bit skinnier, and it's kind of like I said, it's kind of like a bold, but every character stays in place. This is really useful if you're producing a dark mode version of a site. Of course, besides all of that useful stuff, we also get creative possibilities. And this is a font Chi by Ono Typeco. It's glorious in the different versions that it can make. And I think I can animate it a little bit. I stole this from Elliot J. Stocks. I only made it interactive, but it's pretty cool to see that you have like a lot of creative freedom here. Then we got another thing, color fonts, and they look like this. These are actual color fonts. You just load them through Add Font Phase, and then you don't have to do anything else except optionally choose one of the other colors, which is a few lines of CSS. This is all inside the font. There's no need to take an H1 tag and put spans in there and stack them on top of each other and mess around with them. This all just works out of the box. And also there are maniacs who combine those two things, variable fonts and color fonts. This is Megatron by Typographic. He does crazy things. So, okay, good fonts can do all of that stuff, but how do we do that in the browser? Well, there's two ways. One, we can tell the browser what we need, and the other one is tell the font what we need. In the first case, we ask the browser, for instance, can you make this text in small caps? And then the browser can check if the font actually supports that, and if not, it can take uppercase letters, shrink them down a little bit, and make fake small caps. If we tell the font what we need, then we just bypass the browser completely, and we just say, hey, whatever the browser asks you to produce, do it in this version, like a little bit bolder or whatever. So here we are telling the browser what we need. So we say the H1 should have font variant small caps, and the font weight of the paragraph should be 450, because we're not limited to steps of 100 anymore in font weight with variable fonts. So if we would tell the font what we need, we would say enable font feature setting small caps, and we do that with a 4-letter OpenType code, and then the browser has no idea that you asked this from the font, so it cannot produce a fallback or anything. And we're also setting the weight axis of the variable font here directly, which is you shouldn't do that. The problem is if you do that, the browser doesn't know. So if you take an H1 that has like a font weight of 700, but you say, okay, give me font variation settings weight 100, then if you inspect that element, it will still say, oh, this is font weight 700. Also, if you would use something like font weight boulder, it would not know which value to take. So let's do some live coding. Oh, God. So I want to show you something that I made. It's a newspaper, classic newspaper, and I'm going to code on that screen just because I didn't think that live coding would be complicated enough. I'm going to do that there. So if you think, well, why is he shoegazing? That's why. So right, this is a newspaper. Yeah, kind of. And it has a title. It has one paragraph on the left, which represents prose, like a book or an article or a blog post. And hello. And it has one paragraph that represents technical writing. And then we got a table with sportsing results from the sportsing guys. And then we have an about us and a tip of the day. And let's see if we can improve some of this. And like I said, this is subjective, so maybe you say, well, you made it worse. It could be true. So one thing I want to show is that optical sizing that I just demonstrated. I deliberately turned it off here because I want you to see the difference. And optical sizing is turned on by default. If your font has it, you don't have to do anything. Maybe for aesthetic reasons you want to turn it off, or in a demo at CSS Day. So if I turn it on, you can see that H1 there, I think, looks a lot better with optical sizing, right? Right? So, okay, a title that can have a little bit more flair, I think. So maybe we can say font. And I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker, but don't worry, you don't have to take any notes because I will show you how you can figure out all of this later. So font variant ligatures, and I want discretionary ligatures, which are, wait, is this still readable? Yeah, okay. Discretionary ligatures, and I saved it, and if you look at the ST there, you'll see it has now a little swoopy, which it didn't have before. And there are fonts that have lots of discretionary ligatures, some that have a few. I think that looks a lot better. But now on to the meat of the live coding thing. The paragraph there with the prose, it has some numbers in there, but they're kind of shouting at us, right? And that's because these are like uppercase numbers. They are as tall as the capital letters of the font, and if you're reading a text, that's not really what you don't want to have numbers shouting at you. So what we can do here is font variant numeric, and we say old style numbers, yeah. And now you see those numbers are at the same size as the lowercase letters. And that kind of blends into the text. And like for a book or an article, that's maybe what you want. But on the technical paragraph there, the same thing has been applied. But we want those numbers to pop out because we want the meaty details of the technical writing. So we turn them back on again. So font variant numeric, and these are called lining numbers. And now they pop back up again. And you say, well, why didn't you just unset it or something? I wanted to show you that some fonts have one of these as default and the other one has the other as default. So you could, if you explicitly enable what you need, then you're sure that you're going to get what you want. Now, on the left side, there are some abbreviations in that text, like IBM, IKEA, WD-40. And I've put these abbreviations in the aber tag. And aber is an abbreviation of abbreviation, so I use that for the abbreviations. And I think those will look a lot better if they have, they are shown in small caps. So the font variant caps. all small caps. Oh, all petite caps. Yeah, okay. So now they blend into the text a little bit more. You can still see that they're written in capitals, but they behave a little bit better in the text. But the elephant in the paragraph on the right, did you see there is the line height messed up there on line number 3? And that's because of the 8 squared. I put the 2 in the superscript tag, the sub, and browsers have been putting superscript, so that's a number that's moved a little bit up and squeezed tinier a little bit. They've been doing that with vertical align and font size because a lot of fonts didn't have these features or the web just didn't enable us to use it. So we want actual superscript there, and I'm going to do that, but first I have to unset the fallback that the browser has implemented. So first I want to say font size inherit. Font size inherit. So font size is now large again, and vertical align. I want it to the baseline, baseline. Yeah. So now it looks like 82. But that's of course not what we want. So we want actual superscript. So we say font variant position superscript. So font variant position. Yeah, okay. Super, great. So now it's an actual superscript 2. This is drawn like this by the type designers. Not that we take the 2, squeeze it down, move it up. It's actually been drawn there, so it doesn't look as skinny as it did before. It looks proper now. So we have some fractions there that we saw with grandma's gross cookies. We want those fractions here as well. Font variant numeric. And we want diagonal fractions. It's shaping up to be a real technical text, isn't it? So if one thing left, monsters are made of at least 107 pure H2O. This is true. But this is not how you write H2O. And here I'm going to tell the font what to do because the browser cannot do this for us. So I'm going to do something, weep. I'm going to use the font feature settings, and I'm going to enable something called scientific inferiors. And that makes that 2 realize that it's between letters and it needs to move down, and the font does this for us. So now we have one paragraph clearly meant for casual reading and one paragraph clearly meant for technical stuff. Now on to the sporting results. This is maybe my favorite trick that OpenType can solve for you. It's hard to see which sporting team has actually got the most points, right? Because the dweebs there, that looks really fat and really big, so visually they seem to have the most points. But actually the villains have the most points, and the heroes actually don't have the least points. So, but visually it doesn't match. So what we can do to fix this, instead of like grabbing a monotype font, monospace font, well, never grab a monotype font. So grabbing a monospace font or doing shenanigans with everything in a span that you give equal widths. No, we can just say font variant, numeric, and we use tabular numbers. And now the data, and we're lucky that we use tables for data nowadays and not for layout anymore. So if you're using tables, you're probably showing data, and you probably need to enable this. And while we're at it, are those zeros or are those O's? Well, this font also has a /0 in there. And if you enable that, you can see there's going to be a /0, so you won't be confused and think there's an O in there. So on to that about us thing, and specifically that first sentence there that seems to have an epileptic seizure because it's jumping around all the time. Like the numbers have different widths all the time, so when the clock moves, the text behind it moves, and the number of likes there is a complete mess. And obviously, we're just going to copy-paste this line here and enable tabular numbers there, and we have some quiet in that paragraph. Something else, we don't want to receive duck pics. That's very important, so we're going to say text transform uppercase, because we want to shout this at the people, right? But there's a small problem. Did you see that @ symbol there? It's now kind of misaligned. It was nicely aligned when it was all lowercase. Looks like kind of neat, but not uppercase anymore. So there's a font feature that we can enable, which will tell that character you are in between uppercase letters, so behave like you're in between uppercase letters, and that's case-sensitive fonts, right? Now, not just the @ symbol, but also the brackets and the dash, it jumps to be perfectly aligned with the text. So we turn it off, we turn it on. Looks a lot better, I think. Right, so we built this site with table and blink and marquee tags. We did. And we want, well, if we look at this closely, we can see that those, we are using a different font, kind of a coding font for those tags, right? But it looks a little bit smaller. I don't know if you can notice it. Yeah, it looks a little bit smaller than the type around it, right? So we can say, bump it up, please. Make the font size 110. Yeah, now it kind of matches the text around it, right? Or not. But we don't want to do that for every single element that we have this font in. We don't want to do that everywhere. So what we can do, we can go to the font face rule, and we can say size adjust 110. And then it will load the font, increase it to 110, and then hand it to the browser to do its stuff with. And this is especially useful if you're using fallback fonts. It's useful for matching fonts, but it's also useful for fallback fonts, because you can take a local copy of a font like Arial or whatever, and you can say, okay, if this is going to be used, adjust it. Adjust the metric so it looks better like my font. So, of course, if we are using code, we want something like this, right? To highlight that it's code. But there's something off here, and that's we have been wrapping this text in a span with this class. It's an inline block, but it looks off. And I won't go in too much detail about why this is, because I'm running out of time, but we can adjust these metrics with a send override. And I'll show you what that does by putting it to 0%. Oh, that's not where we want that. We want it here. Okay. So now we say anything from the baseline that goes from the baseline to the top, that comes from the font, but we want to override it, and now we squash it down to 0. So now it's at the bottom. So if we say 20, start to grow, 50, and then maybe 80, and that's maybe 85. That starts to look better, right? This was the original, kind of looks, yeah. I know, yeah. So you can do this, again, at the font face level, you say, okay, load this font, adjust this matrix, and now I'm going to use it in my website. Okay, one more thing, the tip of the day, don't be square, and we emphasize this by showing square icons there. These are just simple icons, 1 em high. But sometimes we want those icons to be just as tall as the lowercase letters. And I'm going to quickly show you 2 units. This is not really like an OpenType layout feature, but it's really useful. Like 1x, and now it makes that icon look as tall as the lowercase letters, at least the metrics that the font give. And I always find the optical illusion that is happening, if you bump that up a little bit, it usually looks a little bit better. But you can also use the capital height. And then the icon will be exactly as tall as the uppercase letters, if the font has the correct metrics and doesn't have any other languages that mess with this value. This is a pretty cool thing, I think. But what if you want vertical aligned icons, right? We all know vertical line and then middle, but it never really seems to align at the middle, right? It kind of does with the lowercase letters. And this is a trick by Aroma, who will be speaking tomorrow. I stole it, so it's not my idea. But what we need to do here, if we want to align it to the uppercase letters, we need to take the difference between the lowercase letters and the uppercase letters and just shift it up a little bit. And we can do that with a pretty simple margin top. And I would we do a calculation of 1x minus 1 cap, and we get the difference. And now it's nicely aligned to the uppercase letters. How this works and why we are using the entire difference and not half of it is explained by Roma and his very good article, and also how this works with Flexbox. But for now, this is the tip that I want to give you. But I'm going to do my slides like this for now. You may ask, okay, but how do you know all that stuff? How will you do that? If I have a font, how do I know what my font can do? Well, if you ever ask yourself, what can my font do? Use, what can my font do? And that's a tool that I made. It's this thing. And you can just drop a font in there, and it will analyze it and tell you everything about the font. There is a little message here that there is a beta version, but that's been in beta for over 3 years. So I'm using the old version now. But it tells you everything. Who made the font, which version it is. It tries to estimate which languages it supports, which OpenType features it has. It shows you how the font will look. It will show you the variable access that a font has, and you can just play around with it. I'll come back to that part later. It shows you the OpenType features that are mandatory for the font to work, and it also shows you the optional OpenType features that we've been using in our document just now. And you can just turn them on and off, and you can just see what the difference is and if you like to use it or not. And then it will also tell you all the characters that are in the font, so you can double check that all the characters that you want, you use, are in the font and how they look. And finally, at the bottom, it gives you all the CSS that you need to use this font in production. And you can just take this and do all the tricks that I just shown you in that newspaper thingy, and you don't have to concern yourself with remembering all of that. Wacom Fondu will tell you this. Oh, yeah. And on that note, thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I had a question, and Floris was asking the same question. Where should I go to get my fonts? Like Google Fonts, Monotype, those are good, right?
Mm-hmm. There is one thing that I want to emphasize, and that is there is a whole world of type designers that are just like us. They put a lot of effort in their craft, and they make beautiful fonts, and they just work below the radar. There are like Monotype and Google Fonts and Adobe. They have a lot of fonts, and a lot of fonts are like by dead people who don't even know that there is a digital age. And there are a lot of indie designers that make great fonts, like OpenType company, DJR, Typographic, and they make fantastic stuff. You should get them there and not like Open Sans from Google again.
Okay. So the way you're describing using these features, I mean, earlier today we saw some ways of designing with the grain of the web, and it felt like that kind of design is almost like a two-way conversation between the author, the designer, developer, and the end user, who brings, their browser, their device size, all these different things. And what you're describing, it's almost like a third person enters, which is the designer of the typeface, the font creator, because they bring their opinions, what's available, what's switched on by default. Which brings me to a question by my colleague, Richard Rutter, who asks, from what I can see, there's not much use on the web of OpenType features beyond what happens automatically. Why do you think that is, and what could be done to help?
Yeah, well, the good news is that usually the defaults in a font are what the type designer has decided this is the best. But I think these are hidden, right? These features, so it's pretty hard to know that they exist unless you actually bought the font and read the manual, which nobody does, even for fonts. Well, if the question is why isn't that used more, then I think people don't know. So that's why you should throw them in the fondue.
Right. I was wondering, looking at the way you were doing the superscript, and you were having to unset what the browser was doing automatically, and then apply the OpenType feature. But isn't there an assumption baked in there that that font is loaded and working? Is there any way in CSS to detect that a font is being used? Or is that a security hole?
That a font is being used, or that a feature is being used, that's also a problem. So you could indeed establish that a font has been used, but you never know indeed if you have a font stack and the first font doesn't load and the second font doesn't have that feature. Yeah, then you're in trouble. But luckily, most of this stuff will still work. Like the newspaper example, if none of that works, then it will still look good, unless indeed you unset that the vertical alignment and the font size. But to be honest, I don't think you can do that directly in CSS. That you say, okay, do not unset these things if the main font doesn't load. I would probably, I'm sorry, but I would probably grab JavaScript for that.
Mm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, actually, staying with that example of the superscript, Alan Stearns asks, wouldn't font synthesis none be easier for the reset for the superscript?
Oh, I I don't know if that does that, because font synthesis is when the browser like sees that there is only a regular weight of the font and then kind of makes it bolder by itself by just drawing a bigger outline around it. But I don't. So it manipulates the letter forms, but I don't know if turning off font synthesis will also turn off these font fallbacks. Really, I have to Google that. I'm sorry.
And kind of similar to what I was asking Julia there about, is there any stuff she wishes were in CSS? Do you have an OpenType feature wish list, or is it pretty full at this point?
Well, as far as I know, everything that's possible in OpenType, or at least apart from some obscure or underspec'd things, everything already works. But there is one feature that's pretty fun, and that's randomness, true randomness. So instead of saying, okay, if there's two E's, change that third E, and then if another E follows, change it again. That will always be the same sequence of variations. And if you can have true randomness, then you can make a real handwriting font that's different all the time. I think the support is spotty for that. It would be nice to have that, because you can do a lot of fun experiments with that, I think.
It should be possible. I mean, the way you're describing OpenType fonts, they're programs, right? They're little programs.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So,
with a lot of legacy and a lot of history. So that's, but yeah, they are.
I'm interested in a lot of the stuff you were showing that was really making the design just better, frankly. Obviously the numerals, the superscript, all that stuff. This isn't stuff you're going to find in a Figma file, and I know it's been a theme of the day, but the content writers, the content designers, strategists, they're the ones creating the content. Do you have like a robust kind of default setting, almost like your CSS reset, but for these features?
No, but you could make one enable the prose-like things for if you have a blog post, and do the technical things for the. But talking about Figma, they actually enable you to access a lot of these OpenType features. So a designer can go into Figma. I think Marcin Vickery is doing a lot of work there. So a designer can go to Figma and enable all of this stuff. So you can use it in your website.
Right, but still, the designer isn't going to account for every possible combination of letters and characters that could happen, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I guess the same story here. Designers and the implementers need to work together on that. Yeah.
No, it does strike me something that comes up over and over again is just how this stuff is great, but it's hidden. I mean, that's why it's so great that you made What Can My Font Do, because it exposes that. But do you think that we need to do a bit of education and let folks know? Did you know you could even do this stuff, that it's available?
Yeah, because the stuff that I've shown now, you don't have to be put on a beret and be a designer to use that. So I'm sure you've seen some of these things, like especially the tabular numbers in the table. This is something that the developer also wants, right? So I think writing the blog posts and doing the talks and showing this is the trick to enabling people to use it.
And I'm curious,
because it is hidden, yeah.
It is hidden. A bit of a theme that Matthias brought up at the very start was around this theme of control and relinquishing some control and saying to the browser, you know best. I'll tell you the boundary conditions and you figure out you calculate the pixels.
Right.
There's kind of a similar thing going on with the fonts. I'm trusting the type designer or who's made this variable font that's going to switch out at a certain point of size or width or whatever, that they know what they're doing, so I'm going to trust them. At the same time, a lot of these features feel like a way of giving you, the author, more control. Well, how does it feel when you're doing this? Does it feel like you're giving up control, or you're tightening your grip?
Well, like I said, I'm a crappy designer, so I don't actually actually use fonts in the wild that much, except for my clients, and then they instruct me specifically how they want everything to look. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, this has been excellent, good nerdy fun. We are going to take a break now. You're going to go upstairs, you're going to get some refreshment, get some coffee, hydrate, drink water, also drink the good coffee from our sponsors. Don't take your glasses and cups back in here when you're done, though. And we'll be back in here at 4:15. Something you'll be able to do in this break is you'll be able to have a nice tasty treat. Because as well as this being CSS Day's 10th birthday, it's Stephen Hayes' something's birthday. And we won't sing yet. We're not going to sing to him yet. That's coming. But there is birthday cake somewhere. So up there by the good coffee. So help yourself to some of Stephen's birthday cake. And be back here at 4:15. And please give it up for Roel Nieskens.